The following is an Operation Podcast production.
On the day I got accepted to my doctoral program, I overdosed on cocaine. The thing about rock bottom is that it's not physical, it's spiritual. Perfectionism, workaholism, addicted to the beauty and body standard. So a woman who needed to lift more than 5-pound weights to help her bone density improve so she wouldn't fracture her hip again, but she couldn't because if she lifted those weights, she might get bulky. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, these people are soul sick and I can't treat that as a clinician. Instead of trusting my inner voice and just saying, I didn't know how to fail and I made a big mistake and I'm so sorry. That's when my drinking and using really started to pick up. Your insides are dying for relief.
Sure.
So when I drank and used, I got relief. There was no sign anywhere that I would ever have an issue with drugs and alcohol. And up until my stint living in New York City, it was all kind of for fun and for free. So I'm a lot of things, but at the root, I am most interested in helping people recover from the spiritual malady that they suffer from.
Are you ready for a wild ride? I'm Alexis Artin, and I invite you to strap in because this is more than a podcast. This is Look at Me Now. Hey, everybody. I am wiggling around in my seat, even though I have a little bit of a neck issue happening today. But I am even so wiggling in my seat because I've already got the vibes about today's guest, and I'm not even going to belabor this. I just want to really quickly get to the introductions so that you all can get to know this incredible human being sitting with me. This is Dr. Samantha Harte. Welcome.
Thank you. In-person podcasts are my most favorite thing.
I mean, any sort of let's sit down in the flesh, in real time, be present with each other and have an authentic conversation. I'm sorry, that's just, there's nothing more electrifying to me.
Yep.
I'm all about it.
I have a feeling by the end of the podcast, we're going to be like, wait, what? Who are you?
know.
And how are we not related or something?
Yes. How have we gone our whole lives without each other? I mean, I'm vibing it. I'm vibing it already. But before we get, really in the trenches, I would love for you, Dr. Harte to I mean, I just even love that name, like Dr. Harte.
I know.
I mean, it's all the things. It's like the science and the love combined.
Exactly.
But go ahead and just give everybody sort of an overview of who are we talking to today?
I'm a doctor of physical therapy. That is the fancy degree that I went to school for a really long time to get. I'm also a bestselling author and a sober life coach. And of all of those titles, it's the sober life coach that is probably the most important thing to me because even running a clinic for 10 years, and I'm talking about running a clinic with high net worth people who paid all the money to go in network, couldn't solve their knee pain, and finally came to me and said, you're the one that's going to help me solve this problem. And still, they weren't heroin addicts. They weren't cocaine addicts like me. They were normal people stuck in cycles of dysfunction, like perfectionism, workaholism, addicted to the beauty and body standard. So a woman who needed to lift more than 5-pound weights to help her bone density improve so she wouldn't fracture her hip again, but she couldn't because if she lifted those weights, she might get bulky. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, these people are soul sick. And I can't treat that as a clinician. So I'm a lot of things, but at the root, I am most interested in helping people recover from the spiritual malady that they suffer from.
Woo! I mean, play that back 5 times. Play that back 5 times. We don't even need to go any further. The holy smokes, that is just such an eloquent way of putting the complexity of a lot of my medical experiences. It's a very imbalanced system, right? Our medical system, at least that's the way that I've experienced it. And it really comes down to personal choice and personal diligence to really get holistic care for yourself, especially when you are in the throes of dis-ease. I mean, you may not know this, but I'm a cancer survivor, and I definitely had to navigate my own way as a person who is inherently spiritual, to find and get the support that I needed mentally and emotionally through the technical medical processes that I was going through. And it's amazing because there are so many people who do come to me going, you know, I am working with this doctor, or I'm working with this nutritionist, or I'm working with this therapist, or I'm working with this whatever, and I'm actually not moving the needle as much as I need to, or maybe I am externally, but internally, it's not working for me. And so it's just really beautiful to hear you like right out of the gate speak to the importance of that, and that you bring that balance to your work.
Yeah, it means everything to me.
Want to know what happens when you treat hydration like a suggestion? Because the answer isn't just feeling a little tired or having dry skin. It can lead to some real health nightmares if left unchecked. Take it from this cancer survivor. Hydration is critical. The list of what goes sideways is massive, but it can be easily avoided. My secret weapon is a combination of commitment to having half my body weight in water per day, which is totally doable and easy when you plan for it, and to have electrolytes. And not just any electrolytes with hidden sugars and hide-and-seek ingredients. My go-to is LMNT, the zero sugar electrolyte drink mix that is redefining hydration. It is packed with all the good stuff our bodies need: sodium, potassium, magnesium. So it doesn't just hydrate, it supports nerve function and muscular contractions. How many drinks can you say do that? The best part is, if you're like me and water gets a little boring, the flavor options are endless. And honestly, delicious. I carry it with me wherever I go, and I add it to my water. Enjoy meeting your hydration and electrolyte needs without any sugar, gluten, or artificial ingredients. This is the way that we restore and nourish our bodies that do so much for us. Oh, and get my special offer of a free sample pack with any purchase by visiting drinklmnt.com/LAMN. Enjoy, friends.
I mean, we've already hinted at, you know, there's a story here. I mean, there always is a story here, but can you take us back? I mean, you've already referenced, you know, I've done this hard work, but I also bring the spirituality into the practice. And there was a cocaine addiction, and there's a lot to unpack. So let's go back to the beginning. And like start from the beginning of the timeline.
Yeah.
Tell us, you know, what's your origin story? Where were you born? Tell us about your parents, your upbringing.
Yeah.
Let's start there.
I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
Okay.
Way before
Another East
it was
Coaster.
cool.
Yeah.
Now it's the place to live. Yeah, I
Right.
know. We have a knack for telling the truth, don't we?
Shoot from the hip. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, in my house growing up, it was my big sister, Jessica, and my mom and dad. My parents were unhappily married, and my mom was sure that staying together for the sake of the kids was what she was supposed to do. And in the meantime, my dad was summoned to the basement because at one point the power dynamic was such that my dad controlled finances, was barely affectionate with my mother, and her voice was very stifled based on the way she was raised. And once she found out he had gambled away a ton of money that was supposed to go to my sister and I, the power dynamic switched. So by the time I came online, if you will, in early adolescence, my dad was in the basement, emotionally absent, though physically present. And my mother's word was the holy word. Anything she said was like the word of God. And some of what she said was, your father is a terrible husband, but he's a great dad. So love him for that. But in the meantime, I hate him. These are all the things he's done to me. These are all the reasons why I'm cheating on him in real time. And I'm going to tell you guys about it. She also abused prescription pills. And I didn't know for many, many years that she was really self-medicating untreated mental illness, which growing up just looked like a very, very sad mom who I was always trying to make happy. And then my sister was experimenting with sex and drugs. And so at a young age, I was so overexposed to things that I should have never seen or known. And so I was also experimenting with sex and drugs. I was also oversharing because I didn't know what a boundary was. So I was the girl in school who was high achieving because I knew damn well how to please, perfect, and perform, because that would always win my mother's approval. And it felt highly controlled, right? If I could get an A, then I was good. If I could be pretty on the outside, then you would like me and I would be okay.
Yes.
So I operated very high functioning, and I just dabbled in all these things and then told people, and then they told everybody else. So by the time I was graduating high school, I couldn't wait to get out of Brooklyn because I was that girl in high school that everybody hated and everybody talked about. And I just kept walking through with my chin up like it didn't bother me. And I was absolutely dying on the inside, wanting to be understood. And I go away to college. Now, by the way, I wanted to be a star. So my dream as a girl was to be like, move over, Britney Spears. I'm the one who needs the record deal. I can totally do what you're doing and I can do it better. And in my mother's world, she knew I was talented, but she was like, get a degree. That is a surefire way to a stable life.
Yes.
And of course, projecting all of her own fears and insecurities onto me. And the irony of that, truly, to this day, is that nobody taught me anything about loan documents, about interest rates, about saving. I mean,
Electricity costs money. Yeah, right.
You know, that if you want to go to school to get a doctorate in physical therapy, it's going to cost you $100,000 and you're going to make about 75 when you come out.
Right.
FYI.
Yeah. Real world stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But her word lived inside my nervous system as the safest thing. And so I'm going to college and getting a degree in communications because it felt safe enough. And my need to be perfect is stronger than ever. And I get this professor. Now, by the way, up until this moment, I was nothing but a straight A student and an honest straight A student. I get a professor who doesn't give me anything other than a C. I cannot tolerate it. Do I ask for help? No, because the only person you can count on is yourself. Remember, Sam? I don't have any faith because in my house, if you believed in God, you were an absolute fool. So I plagiarized and I got caught. I didn't just get caught, you know, I mean, I know so many people looking back at this time in my life who plagiarized in college and, never got caught. I got caught and I got an 18-month suspension. Part of that experience that made it so traumatic was at that time, when I left the house, my parents separated. They never got legally divorced. My mom started dating an alcoholic. And his advice was, oh, no. We're going to present to the committee that this was a total fluke. We are going to make such a grand case and they're going to reverse the sentencing. Instead of trusting my inner voice and just saying, I didn't know how to fail and I made a big mistake and I'm so sorry. So I have this insane anxiety, and it was months leading up to this hearing. I mean, I had to go in front of an entire room of people and I'm trying to memorize this script that this alcoholic boyfriend gave to me, because God forbid my mother could stomach that this was actually happening to her perfect daughter.
Sure.
Right? So it felt good to her too.
Right.
Bill's going to get us out of this, Sam.
Yeah.
And no, they put the hammer down and they said, you're suspended for 18 months. Now imagine coming back to school where I'm in my second semester of my sophomore year and all my friends are on their way to graduating. Yeah. The shame of that mistake was so insane that I just told myself and everybody else a story. Well, guess what, guys? I'm taking a year off from school so I can pursue becoming a star, which is what I always wanted to do anyway.
Okay.
So I moved back and I lived with my mom, which was a nightmare for a year because I had been on my own and I started to question all the things that were happening in my house that weren't right. And I say, I'm moving to Manhattan. That's where I'm going to pursue all my dreams. Bye, Mom. That's when my drinking and using really started to pick up.
Because?
between the overexposure to drugs, and by the way, in my house growing up, when my mom's prescription pill abuse was bad enough and the doctors were saying, we can't renew your prescription, you're abusing it.
Right.
The solution to that problem was for her to tell my dad, you need to get this medication
So that I can take
in
it.
your name
Right.
and give it to me. So my dad became, he found his own worthiness by being a very good codependent.
Sure.
So he became the family drug dealer. And that went on in a very deep and scary way into my addiction, into my sister's addiction. And so I moved to New York and I become a bartender, and everything's accessible in New York City. I'm in my 20s. I'm unstoppable. I think that nothing bad is going to happen to me. I have all this evidence that I can be super high functioning and party. Not to mention the unrelenting anxiety inside of me. When you are type A, forget if you're an addict or not, when you're an unrecovered perfectionist, the person sitting in the seat of CEO of your life is the critic, and nothing is ever enough. Even when you get the A, even when you have the perfect body, even when you have the boyfriend and the job and all the accolades, all the check marks culturally, your insides are dying for relief.
Sure.
So when I drank and used, I got relief. It was a work hard, play hard mantra. There was no sign anywhere that I would ever have an issue with drugs and alcohol. And up until my stint living in New York City, it was all kind of for fun and for free. I could do it and I could stop for long periods of time and continue to get straight A's. Even when I went back to school, when I was living in Manhattan, trying to figure out who I was and what I was doing with my life, part-time in school, part-time auditioning, I was still getting straight A's in school all over again. I was holding down a job in my early 20s in Manhattan. I was paying my rent. There was no evidence that I had an issue. But the moment that cocaine was introduced, I realized, God, even if I drink too much behind the bar, I could just do a little cocaine and it'll level me back out. I didn't even care for the effect the first several times I did it, but I wanted to know what all the fuss was about. Everybody
Right.
said cocaine was so amazing. And I'm
Right.
like, and then sure enough, I start to rely on
Yeah.
cocaine as a part of something that needed to be available while I was drinking. And that quickly became an addiction.
Yeah.
I would say in less than 2 years, cocaine took me to my knees. I mean, such that in the rigor of trying to be a star and the rejection, which I had no inner resilience to tolerate, by the way.
Sure.
Right? I mean, if you think of my life up until that moment, everything that made me feel good and whole came from outside of me.
Absolutely.
And so good luck to somebody like that trying to become successful in entertainment. So I decide, as my mother's voice lived inside my head, to not just get the degree and finish at Fordham University. I got my undergrad degree, but to then become a physical therapist, because man, getting a doctorate was so seductive. It did feel like a field that I would enjoy. I wasn't totally betraying myself, but man, that world where if you do this, then you will get that was so, so alluring. School is such a container for a type A. And on the day I got accepted to my doctoral program, I overdosed on cocaine. If that does not capture the way that I was living, I don't know what does. And now, was that my rock bottom? No, not
Ooh.
even close.
Oh boy. Okay.
Yeah.
Keep going. I'm just sitting here absorbing because this is just so rich.
Yeah, there's a
And
lot.
textured and
there's
layered.
a lot. The thing about rock bottom is that it's not physical. It's spiritual. I remember calling the only person that I knew who had time in sobriety after that overdose because I was spooked. I was real scared that I was losing control. I was not at all convinced that I was an addict, that I was going to have to stop forever, that I had any other problem with the way I was living other than I'm losing control over drugs and alcohol. He takes me to a 12-step meeting. I sit in the back and I'm like, absolutely not. Like, you're telling me I need to get down with God. My mother told me there's no such thing. You're telling me I'm insane. You're telling me that I need to believe in some sort of patriarchal view that women don't even drink. So I have to kind of reverse all the language of the book when it says he into a she so I can kind of understand it. I don't drink like you. I don't look like you. I have all the things. Look at my big, beautiful, shiny life, except for this little overdose, which if you can just tell me how to control, I'm out.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I've got the boyfriend, I've got the job, I'm about to be a doctor. I don't need this, right? I wasn't done relying on the coping patterns that I had used for 27 years that kept me safe. I wasn't done with that.
Yeah.
I was just scared that I had a drinking and drugging problem, right? So if you fast forward,
Just fix me.
just fix that.
Just fix this problem.
Yeah.
And it's all good.
It's all good.
Yeah.
You know, and they say that the trouble with addicts is their self-centeredness, that is the root of their trouble. And if you could just get out of your ego, you could hear the message that we're trying to tell you. And my experience in recovery is that those are symptoms. That is not the source. The source is that you don't feel lovable, is that you don't feel worthy, and that you have a lot of shame. So if we come at addicts who are sick and suffering, yes, we've made a ton of bad choices. By the time we get into a room, typically we've hurt a lot of people, but the person we've hurt the most is ourselves. And if we can't get to the root of what that is and speak to them from that place, we are potentially losing lives. So I ran from those 12-step meetings for another year and a half. And there was a guy I was dating all through my active addiction who I cheated on a gazillion times, who stayed with me, who shouldn't have. He finds a prescription pill bottle a year and a half later that my dad was supplying for me. I had just switched my using like addicts do, from uppers to downers, you know, and what became only after 5 p.m., only on the weekends, was all day, all the time. He sees the prescription pill bottle, holds it up, and is like, "You're still doing this?" And I felt so ashamed by the way he looked at me. It reactivated the shame after my overdose. And mostly I was afraid he was going to leave me. And he was really one of the last pieces of evidence that I was actually okay and worthy of love. So I was like, better call that guy again and go back to one of those meetings. The guy's name is Bobby. Bobby was a client of mine when I was a personal trainer, which was for a very short time in Manhattan. Bobby takes me to a meeting again. He's got 22 years sober from heroin addiction. And he's like, "Come on, kid, just stick with me." You know, and they say women should work with women. I didn't trust women. I didn't believe anybody. I just believed Bobby. I believed that somehow he got and stayed sober and was living a really happy life against all odds. So Bobby took me through the steps that year. Quickly, he knew I was 1 foot in and 1 foot out. He knew I didn't believe in God. He's like, "Just borrow my faith until you have some of your own." So I was running very much on my ability to control and manage my world. That was still really how I was operating. As long as everything on the outside is all right and behaves a certain way, I'm fine. But there were dabbles in accountability. There were dabbles in making amends to other people, right? So some of the footprint of the steps was penetrating. But the real serenity you get from developing a faith that is beyond sort of human power, I didn't have any of that. And at the end of my first year, Bobby relapsed, which was unimaginable to me. I mean, this is the only human, 22 years, only human that I actually believe in this whole program. It was like, he's just going to have to tell me this is a joke, because I found out from his wife when I was calling and couldn't get a hold of him.
Wow.
And I was like, surely when we meet up and we're face to face, it will make sense. And I remember meeting up with Bobby and feeling like I was in the presence of a ghost. And it would not be the first time or the last time. When I was little and my mom would ingest those prescription pills, I would watch her eyes glaze over. One of my earliest memories as a girl was asking her, "Why do you have to take those pills every night?" And it's because I was scared of who she became when she did.
Yeah.
And she would say, "Do you like the things you have?" And I would say, "Yes." "Well, if you like the things that you have, I have to buy them for you, which means I have to make money. In order for me to make money, I have to work. In order for me to work, I have to sleep. These pills help me sleep. When I saw Bobby, it was like someone went behind his eyes and blew the light out. Physically present, spiritually vacant. 2 weeks later, he killed himself.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm 1 year sober. And what I know in that moment is if I touch drugs and alcohol, I'm dead. I'm fucking dead. But am I ready to find God? No. No. So what do? I run on an empty program. I had sponsors in between that time, but I couldn't hear the language of the steps in any other way than this archaic, religious sounding cult that wanted me to unravel everything that made me who I was. And so my actual rock bottom didn't happen until 4 years later. That guy that I was dating,
Okay. Yeah.
who caught the prescription pills,
Yeah.
he became my fiance.
Okay.
He became my husband. Now, we should have broken up. We should have had a ton of therapy and healing before any of that. But that's not what we did. We just trudged ahead. And I thought, oh my God, we made it. We made it. Like, this guy didn't leave me. I'm actually good. And then he started pulling away in the marriage. And I don't mean a little bit. I mean, in every way, a human being that you love more than anything in the world could pull away. He stopped looking me in the eye. He stopped holding my hand. He rejected me sexually. He did not support me financially. He was constantly on business trips. He was always leaving his ring on the counter. I went insane in sobriety because I was sure that if I just said or did the right thing, he would love me again. I could control this man. I could change his mind like I had always done with everything in my entire life. And it didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
I couch surfed for months in recovery. And every time that stint on a friend's couch was running out of time, I'd call him and say, are we ready now? Can I come back home? That's how little I thought of myself. Sorry, I don't know what to tell you. We're definitely not in the right place yet. Finally, a sober girlfriend was like, if you are not ready to leave your marriage, you need to get a lease and sign a place and heal. This is not sustainable. And I remember that being the scariest thing for an untreated perfectionist. The idea that I was in a marriage that was falling apart, that had no clear outcome, and I was going to sign a lease for a year, which was really cementing the fact that everything was fucked up, that I had no idea what the outcome was going to be, was like the ultimate defeat, the ultimate being taken to my knees. And the thing about perfectionism is that culturally, we are so rewarded when we check the boxes and we do the things. And we have all the fancy things on the outside. But nobody tells us that it collapses in matters of the heart. There is no perfectionism. There is no amount of control that is going to solve a marital crisis.
Nope.
And when I got into that apartment, I had never been more depressed. I had never been more scared in my life. And a woman came in who was in multiple 12-step programs, who I heard speak at a meeting. And she said, what if we do the steps on your marriage? And that sounded like a really good idea. That is spiritual rock bottom, when every single way that has always worked, that you've tried to live, stops working. And you don't want to die, but you don't know how to go on living. I am so lucky I didn't die in those 4 years that I was running on an empty program. And I'm not a person who believes that everything happens for a reason, because that would mean that I've lost By the way, there's been more people that I have lost, people that I loved, so that I could learn a lesson. And I don't get down with a God that kills people I love to teach me something. However, everything happens and then I can assign a reason to it. When I look back at Bobby's death, that might have been the thing that saved my life from a relapse, because it scared the shit out of me. Other than that, I was hanging on by a thread for those 4 years. That's the thing about addiction and bottoms. People don't understand that it's a spiritual bottom. And a lot of addicts don't survive their addiction before they hit spiritually the bottom.
And it can happen physically, and that can be the trigger for the spiritual
Absolutely.
bottom. But I do hear what you're saying is that ultimately the deepest choice, the deepest place of choice that we come from is a spiritual one. And that ultimately that choice comes from what you just so beautifully said. It comes from that place of, I cannot go on living like this, but I don't want to die. And from that choice, I cannot go on living like this. I have to find another way. And that way can't be for me to take myself out. And I think that that is a really beautiful distinction. And, you know, here we are talking about addiction in terms of drugs and alcohol, but there are so many people who are listening to this that themselves have an addiction or are in relationship to someone who has an addiction. And this can span so far and wide. This can span to eating disorders.
100%.
This can span to, you know, all other types of quote unquote addictions, right? And it's so important that we air these conversations out. It is so important to sit down and to have these vulnerable, courageous, insightful discussions from someone who has been there, someone who has been in the trenches and who has hit the rock bottom of those trenches and has been able to not only come back out, but then to go back and help others find that pathway as well. So you've hit this rock bottom place. You've found this, spiritually divine intervention, right? This person who comes in and says, hey, let's try this. And something about it sounds really good to you. Then what?
I think the moment of all moments that changed my life is when we got to the 9th step, which is making an amends. You know, I made so many amends up until that point, always outwardly, always to other people. Remember, I'm a perfectionist, right? So the voice in my head that is the loudest is the "you're not enough" voice. And she said, have you ever made an amends to yourself? Revolutionary question. 30 years old. It never occurred to me, nor had anyone ever asked me that. Why does that matter? I had a way for the first time in 30 years to start arresting the critical voice. Because if it was possible that I had made 1,000 bad choices, but that I wasn't a bad person, and I actually deserved a big, beautiful life and not the shitty marriage that I was in, if that was possible, then what would be a kinder way to speak to myself? Other than the way I've constantly been speaking to myself, which is, this is what you get for what you did, Samantha. So I had a way to interrupt the inner critic and consider what a more compassionate self-talk would sound like and would feel like. When I began a practice of that, because boy, is it a practice. I am here sitting and telling you guys now, for 10 years on the other side of that, the critical voice is so quiet. She does not sit in the seat of CEO. But it is a practice like everything else. If we want to rewire the brain-body connection, the loops that had been so deeply ingrained and practiced for criticizing were very strong and reinforced. So it has taken me the last decade to weaken those loops and strengthen the others. But the miracle of beginning to forgive myself was that I could hear my intuitive voice for the first time. Since I was that little girl that asked my mom, why are you taking those pills every night? Because that was my intuition.
Absolutely.
And when she spoke up, my mother said, don't ask that again. She had been silenced in my marital crisis when I said, I swear to God, you're cheating on me. Just tell me the truth. None of this makes sense. He said, I'm not the cheater, you are. It was silenced. And all of a sudden, I heard her voice again. How did I know it was my intuition? Well, for starters, it sounded nothing like my critical voice. It sounded curious. It was calm. It was compassionate. And I say this a lot. It's really strange and ethereal, but it always feels like it's rising from my belly up. Whereas when I am in fear and I'm doubling down on what I can control, it's so cerebral. It's an obsessive rumination of thoughts and strategies in between my ears. If I could just figure it out, it feels so constrictive.
Yes.
And when it's my intuition, it's so expansive.
It's holding
Just
it with
sort
an
of
open
floats
palm.
up.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about this a lot in something that I've coined the soul body paradox, and everything that I do comes from and comes back to this concept. But it's basically like our human nature, our human body and being. It comes from things being very black or white. It comes from a space of there is a very finite nature to my existence. There's a very clear beginning and there's a very clear end, right, of my lifespan and actually of my physical body, the space that I can take up, right? Whereas the spirituality of us it's energy, right? It's neither created nor destroyed. It's so expansive. It has no limits. It's not finite, it's infinite. And thereby it's connected to everything all the time. So if you think about those two complementary opposites, right? One, the body is very uncertain. It has to be, right? Because where's my end? If I'm finite, where's the end? Where's the threat? Whereas our energy of our spirituality is infinite and so expansive that it doesn't even understand what it is to be finite. It doesn't understand a threat. It doesn't understand an end. And what are the bridge between those two things when we embody them, right? You and I sitting here in the flesh together right now, when we embody those two things, where do they meet in the middle, these polar opposites? They meet in our mind and in our heart. So our mind is either going to align our spirituality, our deep intuition, our inner wisdom, our knowing. I define soul with the acronym source of unconditional love. How are we tapping that source of unconditional love and bringing it into, the animal-like nature of our body that is navigating threat all the time? And it's through our mind, and our mind creates our emotions. And if we could get the mind to connect versus disconnect these two worlds in harmony, to be the complementary opposites that they actually are, we can live in that state of having a little bit more certainty in the things that we can control and letting go of the things that we can't. Living in a state of trust, living in a state of, I get to choose how I treat myself. I get to choose to live in the certainty that my soul can provide me, that no matter what anybody else's opinion of me is or expectations of me are, I get to be the decider. I get to decide that I'm lovable. I get to decide whether or not I'm going to accept or reject an invitation or an expectation from somebody else.
Yeah.
And I think that you're speaking to that in real world terms, right? Of you coming into a place in and of yourself where you are going, okay, the center of all of the meeting points in my world, in this marriage, in the death of friends, in the addictive process, in my relationship to my mother, in my relationship to my own intuition. The common denominator of all of those things is me and my ability in any given moment to have agency.
Yep. I would never have discovered my own sovereignty without the amends process lifting the shame that I was carrying on my back. Without a vehicle to clear shame, we have no agency.
And the way to clear shame is bearing witness and applying love. And sounds like that was the process that you allowed yourself, you gave yourself the permission for. And it sounds like you took great care in going through that process really mindfully.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I heard my intuitive voice, it wasn't just about listening. It was about moving in the direction she was nudging me. That was the real leap of faith. I now call the whisper of my intuition God. Whereas I couldn't even speak that word for most of my life. I have no problem calling it God now. I had to take action in the direction she was nudging me to experience what would happen. And then I started accumulating
That's how you
wins.
build trust for yourself, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? If you stick to the commitments you make with yourself, the critical voice doesn't have a lot of room to say something. But you're only going to take those actions if you believe you're worthy of them.
Yeah, and somebody has to teach you. I mean, you didn't have a model for
Exactly.
Here's how you actually take care of yourself, speak kindly to yourself, think highly of yourself, that there is an alternative to shaming and shitting on yourself.
Yep.
You've got to start somewhere. And it sounds like this was the beginning of you finding that, oh, that's actually even an option for me.
Yep.
Let alone here's how I apply it.
Yep. I have been using the 12 steps in this way for the last 10 years. And when I tell you, my husband was having an affair. And it was a 5-year affair with the same woman that started before I got sober and was on and off and seeped into my marriage. Okay. And we've recovered. And that would take a whole second podcast episode. Okay. So if people want to know about that, buy my book, the story's in there. But what I can say about that is when I was so sure I was done. I mean, I done to the point of filing the divorce papers, having lots of sex with lots of other people, reclaiming my liberation. My intuition spoke up about 8 months into that and said, "Are you sure you're done?" And to her, I turned and said, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Okay, really fighting with her.
Right.
But I had to listen. I had to listen. I had to sit with that question because she said, "If you're done, I support you and I'll love you through that. But if you're not, and if you might see a happy future somewhere down the line with this man, if there is a way that he too made really bad choices, but isn't a bad person, and you could be happy on the other side of this mess, you might need to stay." And I sat and had to consider that. I meditated on that question for months. And every time I did, it was like looking through a dark tunnel, pitch black. And at the very end, there was a fucking match that was lit. This tiny flicker of hope.
It's so interesting how I'm adjusting in my chair to dig into this idea, but it's so interesting how perspective is everything. Like one of my mentors talks about how, when you first meet somebody and you're so enamored with them, even to the point that it's sort of like your mouth, like you want to eat them, you want to kiss them, you call them sweetie pie and honey cakes. And, it's like everything about them is just so yummy and juicy, right? And like even the way he chews his food, you're like, oh my God, I just love him so much, right? Or her, or whoever. But, and then, a year later, 10 years later, whatever, some shit hits the fan, right? They're cheating on you. They're not paying as much attention to you, whatever it is, right? And all of a sudden, the way that they chew their food is like you want to stab a fork in their eye. The same thing that you loved so much about them, you couldn't get enough of it. And now it goes from the mouth end of things to the rear end of things. And all of a sudden they're an asshole, they're a shithead, it's no longer honey and sweetie cakes and I want to eat you. It's like, you're a piece of shit, get away from me. Get out of me, go away. I want to flush you down the toilet, right? And the behavior never changed. He always chewed like that. You know what I'm saying? It's like how it's perspective is everything. I actually just posted something. I mean, here we are. We're in the Instagram world, right? But it's like I posted something on Instagram about how, at one point Kim Kardashian was like, Taylor Swift is all I'm listening to. I love her. I love her. I love her. And now it's like they're just arch enemies, right? And she wouldn't be caught dead listening to Taylor Swift. It's just so interesting how really perspective is everything. And what is so beautiful about what you're saying is most people, and I'm not trying to make a blanket statement here, but like most people who have a rupture in their marriage, like you're talking about, they would just make a snap judgment call. They would slap a label on it. They would send it off in the box of, he's a cheater, I'm done.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. I'm not, every relationship is different. But there are so many people who do that when actually it may not be in their highest good. Maybe it is in their highest good. Again, every relationship is different, but it may be that there is a deeper healing or a deeper calling or a deeper investigation to be had, but we cling to a perspective, right? We cling to one end of the story. It's so good or it's so bad versus what if I didn't slap a label on it and I was lovingly curious about what else is possible here. And you did that. And it's rare and it's interesting. And I would love to hear more about what your thoughts on that as I just say that out loud.
Yeah. What comes to mind is culturally where we're at, we have lost the ability to have intellectual discourse where we agree to disagree and we share the very complex nature of how we feel about whatever it is. We want to believe if you vote this way, this is who you are. If you stay with a man who cheated on you, this is what it means. Because it feels like we're in control, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And we're not.
And we're not.
And it's actually both and. I was both deeply betrayed by my husband and I love him more than anything.
And it's always both. I mean, we talk about that all the time on this podcast. It's always both. You are never going to have the shadow without the light. What goes up has to come down equal distance.
Yep.
It is never going, it is both. The way he chews is adorable and the way he chews is maddening. And it is both. And it depends on, in any given moment, what perspective you're clinging to because it supports or challenges your values, let's just call it.
Yep.
Right? The way that you're choosing to see the world in that moment in time.
Yeah. And when I was deciding to take this man back, the truth was at any given time, when I looked over at him, I felt both deep anger and resentment and a deep swell of love. And both were true at the same time, no matter how sober and mindful and clear my perspective was. But that's what it means to be vulnerable and fully alive. I was willing to feel it all because I remembered my own story, which is that once upon a time, I was an untreated addict who was deeply self-centered, who didn't feel worthy of love, who trampled on the hearts of others to get what I needed to fill that hole, who became a sober woman with dignity and grace. And I believed, even though I couldn't feel it for a while, that that was true for him too. I widened the lens instead of just creating a snapshot that supported the story that he's a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is what everybody wanted me to do. Because when I moved to California with him to start my PT career, to start my marriage, everyone out here just knew me sober. That's when everything unraveled with my marriage. By the time I found everything out, they were all like, there's no way you're taking him back, right? But I remembered my whole story. And I had finally gotten to know my intuitive voice, and I was not going to abandon her now. Right? And so, yes, at any given moment, you can, once you have the choice and you're consciously living your life, consciously creating your destiny, I can choose a perspective shift, but sometimes it just hurts like hell. Sometimes
It's not an easy road. I mean, we are human, and we are going to jump from judgment to judgment, and fear to fear, and thought to thought, and feeling to feeling, and all of those things. And it is a journey to come back to, what is my truth? What is the next best, highest aligned action that I can take? And how can I, no matter what the results of that are, come back to myself with the tone of love and not abuse?
Yeah. Yeah. And when people ask me, how did you get through that time? The real life version of what that healing looked like was this. I would be in the kitchen cleaning the dishes. Something would be dirty about the house that I swore I had asked him to fix 1,000 times. And then I'm saying something a little begrudgingly about how I have to do these dishes, even though I kind of already. And the way in which he responds in that moment is a little bit dismissive. Like, okay, whatever. Like and I'm activated to a level 9 out of 10. And I react from a place that doesn't match the scenario of the dishes, right? And he's like, whoa, what is going on? Okay. Now I have to take my own inventory and go, what just happened? Because if that's a 2 out of 10 issue and I reacted at a 9 out of 10, it's not about the dishes. So what is it about?
What dysregulated you?
So I would take this a second.
Yeah.
All right. I'd been in a lot of therapy. I'd been in sobriety a long time. I've been doing a lot of work. And I went, oh my God, the way he emotionally just dismissed me took me right back to the 2 years of gaslighting where I said, please tell me if you're cheating on me. And he looked at me and said, I'm not the cheater. You're the cheater. That's where I went in my body. And I would show up and I would say, this is what just happened. I didn't mean to overreact. This is really hard. And he would meet me in that space. And this is the other really important part.
I was going to say, this is key right here. Yeah.
He met me in that space and said, I'm so sorry that this is so hard. I love you and I'm here. And we would hug and I would cry. That happened again and again and again. That was so much.
And he has to meet you in making that choice over and over and over and again.
Exactly.
Because it is, how are you co-regulating as well as how are you dealing with your own dysregulation? And yeah. Well, gosh, I mean, we could just do this for ages. So in the present moment, you guys have worked through these things. You are still married, you're parents, you are doing life together.
Yeah.
And tell me a little bit about now. Like give me just a snapshot of now.
Yeah. 2 years ago, I lost my sister to a drug overdose. Addiction is a family illness, and I am not the only one who has suffered.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you. The reason I need to say that is because I had a thriving physical therapy practice, except for that spiritual malady that I so desperately wanted to cure. And when I lost my sister, Samantha 1.0, doctor of physical therapy, died too. I could no longer just do that work in the world. And I wrote a book. I knew I had to write a book on the day that she died. I didn't know what it was going to be about. It's out in the world. It came out on June 10th. It is a modern reinvention of the 12 steps of recovery. Because I don't know whose life it's going to save, but I know that it saved mine. And so now, yes, I have a big, beautiful life with my husband. We have 2 kids. We have a big ass house in the suburbs. His business is super successful. I mean, we were kids when we met, broke. We are stable, thriving, comfortable, deeply in love. I have reinvented my career. I am now more than anything else a sober life coach because it gets to the root of absolutely everything. And if somebody wants my expertise on their body, they'll get it. But I'll be damned if we don't talk about their spiritual fitness first. I am in the business of saving lives. I am in the business of taking these steps and not recovering anonymously and not recovering in silence, but recovering out loud and making these 12 steps available to anyone, whether they are an addict in the traditional sense or not, so that people have a pathway through their pain.
I mean, that sounds like a beautiful snapshot of the present and also sort of a glimpse at the future, like the horizon, the timeline. I mean, what lives when you face forward? What lives in that lens?
I plan on being one of the greatest motivational speakers of all time.
Amen.
I want to sell out stadiums. I want to save lives. I want to coach people. There are so many products and services I've created over the years for fitness and mental health. So as the coaching practice becomes so robust that I can't fit someone in, they spill out into the next tier. We do group coaching, or they buy the book, or they buy the fitness program, or they come see me at a show.
Beautiful.
There is no ending. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just a beginning.
As it should be with healing in general, with, whenever there is somebody who has the resources, and by resources, I don't mean money. I mean the resources to help, right? A skill set that is of service. The boundlessness of it is inherently baked into it. And so bravo for sharing it.
Thank you.
I'm going to pose our final question that we pose to all of our guests on this show. I'm like, we pose it. I pose it. I'm the only one sitting here. And so I would love you to envision that we have a mirror here and drowning out all of the external noise, opinions, agendas, expectations, that gaze, and really just taking yourself in and all the yous that you have been up until this point, sitting in this seat, in this moment, reflected in that mirror. What is it that you would want to say to yourself in a look at me now moment of self-advocacy and acknowledgement?
By the way, I ask people on my podcast almost the same thing, which is so epic. I told you we're the same human. Even in this part of my life, when I want so many things, and they're so big, the things that I want, when I am being the truest to that person in the mirror, what I want her to know and what I try to remind her of is that you've already done the thing. I am the cycle breaker in a long lineage of sickness. If I died today, my kids will know a sober mother. They will have my book. They will hear my voice on a podcast. They will know how their mother got through her hardest things. I am changing the trajectory for my lineage. And I forget that. I have already done the thing.
That's really beautiful. I mean, as stated, this is really just the beginning, especially for anybody listening to this who wasn't already familiar with you. So where can they find you? How can they get in touch with you? How can they be part of your world?
Oh, there's so many ways. I'm very active on Instagram, and my handle is at Dr. Samantha Harte. So at Dr. Samantha Harte, which is Harte. And by the way, that is not my mate. That's my real name. I did not take my husband's name. So can we just talk about how cool that is? And my website is also Dr. Samantha Harte. And there's so many ways to get in touch with me and see my offerings on the website. So I would say those two places are the best.
Absolutely. And I look forward to many more conversations with you on and off line. And I'm so grateful for you agreeing to sit down with me and for being so forthcoming and so genuine and hopefully really, really helpful to everybody that has been tuning in to this conversation.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to be here.
Okay. That's another juicy episode, juicy of Look at Me Now, and we'll see you next time. Love you.
Join us for Look at Me Now, wherever you listen to podcasts, and be sure to share, like, and subscribe.